The road through Emmett County had been invisible under 6 inches of new snow for 20 minutes before Corporal Liam Garrett's truck went sideways on a curve and found the ditch at the edge of Route 6. 115. The temperature had dropped to 14 degrees. In the passenger seat, Hazel pressed her nose to the window and watched him with the focused interest of a dog assessing whether this situation requires action. A mile ahead, through the dark and the falling snow, a single light burned in the window of a farmhouse set back from the road at the end of a cleared field. Liam had his phone, 1 bar of signal, and a dog who needed to move soon, and that light was the only light visible in any direction. What he found inside that farmhouse, and what happened 3 weeks later when Nora Dill called his number at 7 in the morning and said she didn't know who else to call, was a story that begins with a bowl of soup and ends with something that cannot be named by any single word. Subscribe if you haven't found this channel yet. This is the kind of story we tell here. Liam was 29 and had been a Marine for 8 years and had come back from his first overseas deployment 4 months ago, carrying the specific disorientation of a young man who left home knowing who he was and came back to find that the person who left no longer quite fit the person who returned. He wasn't broken. He wasn't dramatically damaged. He was something more ordinary and harder to name. A young man whose interior geography had shifted in ways he hadn't finished mapping, driving home for Christmas for the first time in 2 years because his mother had asked enough times that he had finally said yes. He had grown up in the Virginia mountains, which meant the landscape outside his windshield was the landscape of his childhood, and it had seemed like the right year to return to it. He was still working out what return meant. He had not expected the blizzard. He had not expected the ditch. He had not expected Nora Dill. Hazel was a Belgian Malinois, 5 years old, tawny with a black muzzle and the amber alertness of her breed. But there was something in her manner that distinguished her from the image most people carried of military dogs. She was curious in a way that had not been worn down, warm in a way that surprised people who expected her to be formidable. She had trained for patrol and detection, but had spent her first year in a veteran support program, and she had developed in that time a gentleness with elderly people that showed itself in the way she lowered her head when she approached them, as though she had read the room and determined that softness was the right instrument. She rode in vehicles with her chin on the armrest or her nose pressed to the glass, and she was known to fall asleep in a stranger's lap, which was not regulation, but was also not something Liam had ever found a good reason to correct. Nora Dill had been 93 for 6 weeks and had been informed by her son Randall in Charlotte, by her doctor in Roanoke, and by the well-meaning people at her church that 93 was an age at which a person ought not to be alone in a farmhouse in the Blue Ridge in winter. She did not dispute the arithmetic. She disputed the conclusion. She had been born in Emmett County in 1932, had grown up 2 roads over, and had lived on Route 615 since 1956. When she and Clyde Dill were married in the house that Clyde and his father had built the spring before the wedding from timber they milled themselves on a neighbor's lot. Clyde was a carpenter, the finest in Emmett County for 4 decades, and the county knew it because there was not a new house or repaired barn within 20 miles that didn't carry his work somewhere in its bones. He built their house as though it were meant to outlast him because he believed that things worth building were worth building that way. He died in 2013 in the chair in the front room, at 84, with his boots on, which was precisely what he had always said he intended, and which he had managed because Clyde was a man who generally managed what he said. She had taught 3rd grade for 31 years, the same children year after year, cohort after cohort, until she had taught the children of her first students, and then their children. And in this county, her handwriting was known in every household because she had written in the front of every Bible given to a child at confirmation for 30 years, at the pastor's request, because her cursive was the finest in the county and because she had never been able to say no to things that mattered. She still sent cards. Her writing had not changed. She had been behind on property taxes for 4 years, since Clyde died. The fixed income from Social Security and his pension covered most things most months, but the taxes had grown each reassessment, and by the 3rd year she was behind enough that notices began arriving in envelopes she set in a pile on the kitchen table meaning to deal with. And the pile had grown, and she had told herself something would work out because something always had. A man named Darren Price had come to her door in September with a courteous voice and official-looking papers. And when she had asked him whether there was any kind of program that might help her, He had told her that the property tax situation was different, that there was nothing available. She had believed him. She had been believing what people told her for 93 years, and it had generally served her. 12 years since Clyde died. She still set two places at the kitchen table in the morning without thinking about it. Do you know someone like Nora, someone who has been managing quietly, believing what they've been told, because something always works out, because that has always been true before? If that person is still reachable, go to them. If they're not, type their name in the comments below. They deserve to be remembered. The light in Nora's window was visible through the gaps in the tree line, warm and steady, the kind that suggests someone awake and capable of answering a door. Liam zipped his collar up, clipped Hazel's lead, and started walking. The snow was 6 inches deep and still coming. By the time the farmhouse emerged from the dark, he had been in 14-degree air for 25 minutes, and Hazel was moving with the quiet urgency of a dog that is determined that forward is better than stopped. She opened the door before he knocked. He was still on the porch steps when the light came out with her. A small woman in a flannel housecoat and slippers who looked at him the way people look at a thing that requires no deliberation and stepped back to make room. "You come inside," she said. "Both of you." He said he was sorry to bother her, that his truck had gone into the ditch, that he needed to call a tow. She said the tow service in Emmett County didn't run in weather like this until 6 in the morning, and that he needed somewhere to be until then. And that somewhere was here, and that this was not a discussion. She turned and went back to the kitchen, and Hazel followed her without being directed, which was not something Liam had to apologize for in this particular case, because it appeared to be the correct call. He stood for a moment in the entryway. The house was warm and smelled of wood smoke, and something on the stove, the walls had the density of a place lived in with care for 60 years. Photographs, a quilt square framed above the radiator, and on the wall beside the hallway a VFW post certificate dated 1987 with a small flag in a folded case beneath it. He looked at the unit designation on the certificate. He looked at it for a moment longer than a stranger would. He knew that unit. His grandfather had mentioned it by name more than once, in the careful way old soldiers mentioned things they had survived together with other men. He stood in this woman's entryway and understood, without being able to explain the sequence of it, that he was connected to this place in some way that preceded his arriving in a ditch in a blizzard. In the kitchen, Nora was already ladling soup. Hazel had located the rug by the stove, the warmest spot in the room, and settled onto it with the proprietary ease of a dog who has identified the correct place and taken it. Nora did not remark on this. She set a bowl in front of Liam and refilled her own coffee and sat across from him. And they talked. They talked for 3 hours, in the particular way of two people who have been separately lonely and find themselves unexpectedly in the presence of someone worth talking to. Liam ate the soup, vegetable with something in the broth he couldn't identify and couldn't stop tasting, and Nora asked him where he was from and what it was like to come back. He told her things he had not told his mother. Not dramatic things, the ordinary things, the ones that didn't have a clean shape yet. The way a familiar place looked different now. The way he didn't quite know yet what he was supposed to be doing with himself. Nora listened the way she had listened to children for 31 years, without interrupting, without fixing, without telling him what it meant. At around 2 in the morning, with Hazel's head in Nora's lap and the snow still falling outside, Liam mentioned his grandfather's unit. Nora set down her coffee. She named a man, quietly, with the specific weight of someone saying a name they have kept for a long time. Liam recognized it. It was on a photograph in his grandfather's study, a face he had grown up seeing without a full story attached to it. Nora gave him the story. She had known the man's family. She had taught his daughter 3rd grade in 1971. There are moments that feel less like coincidence than like the completion of something that was already underway. This was one of those moments. Neither of them said so. Some things carry more weight in the silence between two people than in the words that would describe them. Nora sent him to the guest room at 3 in the morning with a quilt and instructions he followed. Hazel went with him. In the morning, the snow had stopped and the tow truck came at 6:15 and pulled his truck out of the ditch and onto the road. Liam stood at the foot of Nora's porch steps before he drove away. He gave her his number. He told her he was glad the ditch was where it was. She told him to drive carefully and went inside. What Liam found on the kitchen table when he came back 3 weeks later and what it told him about the man who had visited Nora in September would make the drive back feel, in retrospect, like the only direction he could have gone. He was 3 hours north driving back to base in early January when his phone rang and the name on the screen was Nora, Route 615. He pulled to the shoulder. Her voice was steady. It was the voice she used for things she had decided to get through. But in the pause before she spoke, he heard the end of a long patience. "That man is here again," she said, "with papers and a deputy. I don't understand what they're saying, and I don't know who else to call." Liam was already turning the truck around. The deputy's car was gone when he arrived, and Price with it. Nora was at the kitchen table with a folder of documents arranged in the order they had arrived, carefully in sequence, which was how she handled everything she was uncertain about. Liam sat across from her and read them. The tax arrears were $14,200 over 4 years. The lien had been purchased by a company called Stonecroft Property Holdings 14 months ago. The right of redemption had expired. The sale date on the most recent notice was 11 days out. The house and the 2.6 acres it sat on, the house Clyde Dill had built the year they were married, would transfer to Stonecroft unless Nora paid the full arrears plus acquisition fees, which were not specified but which Liam estimated, from what he understood of this type of operation, would bring the total to somewhere between $18,000 and $22,000. Nora watched him read. He asked, when Price had come in September and she'd asked about assistance programs, what exactly had he said? She thought. I asked if there was anything like what they offer for the electric bill. He said the property tax situation was different, that there wasn't anything comparable. Liam opened his phone and walked through the house while he searched. He walked through it the way you walk through something you were trying to understand. Not inspecting, but witnessing. Clyde's work was in everything. The door casings cut with a precision that production work never achieves, the window trim fitted to a tolerance that meant 68 years and not a single gap. A small detail carved into the corner joints of the hallway baseboards that served no purpose except the care of a man who believed that the parts no one would see deserved the same attention as the parts they would. A man had built this house as an act of love. It was not a piece of real estate. It was a record. The Virginia Homestead Exemption and the Elderly Homeowner Property Tax Relief Program had both been in effect when Price first visited. Combined, they would have reduced Nora's annual liability substantially and provided a managed pathway to the arrears. Virginia statute required that elderly homeowners in tax delinquency receive written notice of all applicable relief programs as part of standard notification procedure. The stack of official notices on Nora's kitchen table contained no such information. He made 4 calls in 90 minutes. A Veteran Services Housing Legal Line. The Virginia Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division, where the statutory notification failure produced an immediate flag. Randall in Charlotte, who had his own lawyer and was on the road within the hour. And a man in the county assessor's office whose 3rd-grade teacher had been Nora Dill and who was not, when it came to it, willing to pretend he hadn't been. He did not tell Nora about the calls yet. He told her that a program existed she should have been told about and wasn't. She was quiet for a moment. Then, he said there was nothing available. I know, Liam said. Nora looked out the window at the frost-gray field, the field that had been hers for 68 years. Something moved through her face that he recognized as a woman doing the accounting of what it cost to have believed the wrong thing. He's coming back tomorrow, she said, with the final paperwork. What Darren Price walked into the next morning, and what happened in the first 30 seconds after he came through the door, was nothing like the room he had been preparing for. If you were Darren Price, walking toward that door, knowing what was on the other side, what would you have done? Type it in the comments below. I read every one. He came at 9 with Deputy Alma Cole and a man he introduced as his company's associate, who carried a briefcase and said nothing throughout. Price was 44, well-dressed for a house call, with the practiced courtesy of a man who had conducted this procedure enough times to have made it routine. Not cold, not apologetic. Professional in the way of a thing done so often it no longer requires deliberation. He had expected Nora. He had not expected the young man standing beside the kitchen table, or the dog. Hazel had been on the stove rug. When the door opened, she stood. She did not bark. She moved to the space between Price and Nora and placed her weight forward. And from her chest came a sound that was not alarm, not the sharp, reactive double note of a startled animal, but the low, continuous, even register of a dog that has finished its assessment and is no longer deciding anything. She was simply there, between them, still. Price looked at the dog. He looked at Liam. "I don't believe we've met," he said. "No, sir," Liam said. Deputy Alma Cole was 46 and had grown up in Emmett County and had sat in third grade in this school district in 1985 with a teacher whose handwriting was in the front of her confirmation Bible. She stood at the door with her thumbs in her belt and her face in the neutral expression of someone performing a professional function she had not yet decided how to feel about. Price set the transfer documents on the table alongside Nora's notices and explained, in his practiced voice, that the sale date was 10 days out, that the redemption period had closed, and that he was here to give Nora the opportunity to make a final determination about her plans for the property. Nora looked at the papers on the table. Then she looked up, not at Price, not at Liam, not at anyone in particular, in the way of someone reporting a fact for the record. He said there was no help available. Deputy Alma Cole wrote something in her notebook. She did not look up. Price's associate looked at Price. Hazel had not moved. The sound in her chest had not stopped. Liam spoke in the tone he had learned to use in situations where the only thing that mattered was precision, level, specific, without affect. He said that Virginia statute required written notification of all applicable relief programs to elderly homeowners in tax delinquency prior to lien sale, and that the notices on the kitchen table contained no such notification, and that the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division had received a formal complaint at 4:15 the previous afternoon regarding this deficiency. He said that a 30-day administrative stay had been requested by Randall Dill's legal representation pending review of the notification failure. He said that the county assessor's office had been asked to produce its record of what notifications were sent and when. He did not raise his voice. He described the sequence of events in the order they occurred. Price looked at his documents. He looked at them for a long time, the way a man looks at something that has encountered an obstacle it wasn't designed for. He was not finished. The legal question was not resolved. But the room was different from the room he had walked into. Deputy Alma Cole said she would not be executing eviction proceedings on the property pending legal review, and that this was her determination as the attending officer, and that she was recording it in writing. Price's associate closed his briefcase. Hazel did not move until the sound of their car had disappeared down Route 615, and the road was quiet. Then she walked back to the stove rug and lay down with the self-possession of a dog who has done what was necessary and considers the matter concluded. Nora stood at the kitchen window looking out at the field. 68 years, she said. She wasn't saying it to anyone in the room. She was saying it to the field, as a statement of record. The administrative stay held. The Attorney General's review confirmed the notification failure and found it sufficient to void the lien execution under Virginia statute. Stonecroft Property Holdings engaged its own legal counsel for 11 weeks and then did not engage it further, which was the legal equivalent of acknowledging a door that isn't going to open. The arrears remained, and they were real. Randall drove from Charlotte and sat at the kitchen table with his mother in February and had the conversation he had been trying to have for 4 years. And at the end of it, the arrears were cleared and a payment structure was in place. And Nora said she supposed she should have called him sooner. And Randall said she should have. And they sat with that. And then Nora made coffee. By the following spring, the Attorney General's investigation had identified 6 other elderly homeowners in 3 Virginia counties who had been told there were no assistance programs available by the same operation. 2 of them had already lost their properties. The investigation did not stop at 6. Liam drove back to Emmett County in March when the dogwood was flowering on Route 615 with no particular errand and no plan. Nora was on the porch when he pulled in. She had been expecting him, she said, in the tone of someone who has been 93 years old and has learned how certain things unfold. She fed him lunch. He fixed a section of porch railing that had been loose since October. Hazel found the stove rug and settled onto it as though she had a standing reservation, which at this point she may have. In the afternoon, they sat on the porch in the March sun, and Nora talked about Clyde, not about losing him, but about what he had been. The way people talk about someone they have been loved by for a long time and have learned to carry forward rather than back. Liam listened and thought about the VFW flag in the hallway and his grandfather's unit and the man whose photograph he had grown up seeing and whose story Nora had given him in the kitchen in December at 2 a.m. The morning while the snow fell, he thought about the thread that ran through all of it, through the generations of men who had gone and come back, and the women who had kept the doors open for them, and what it meant to be young and trying to find where you fit, and to find the answer somewhere unexpected, on a mountain road, in a blizzard, in the light of someone's window. She had fed him when he was cold. He had come back. That was the whole of it. And the rest had followed from those two decisions the way everything follows from the decision to open a door and the decision to return through it. What Liam Garrett did for Nora Dill was not complicated in the way we sometimes make these stories complicated. He knew about a program she should have been told about. He made 4 phone calls. He showed up twice, once because a ditch put him there, and once because she called and he turned the truck around. He was 29 years old and had not yet figured out where he fit. And in February, he called his grandfather and told him about the VFW flag and the name on the certificate. And his grandfather was quiet for a long time on the other end of the phone. And then he said, "That's the county I always told you about. That's the place." He had been heading home. He had found it here first. This story is for every woman who has held doors open her whole life and deserves to have one held open for her. For every widow in a house her husband built with his own hands who has been told there is nothing available when there was. And for every young man still figuring out where he fits, who finds sometimes that the answer is in the place where someone needs him to show up. Is there someone in your life like Nora, someone who has been feeding people and holding things together so long that no one thought to ask whether she needed anything herself? Tell me about them below. I read every one. Every story on this channel is about choosing not to look away. If that means something to you, subscribe so you're here for the next one. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.